Story 1. My boyfriend has always been in love with speed. From the very beginning of our relationship, when we first started dating, he would tell me how much he loved the feeling of the wind on his face as he sped down the road on his bike. But I didn't understand it. How could you be so passionate about something like a bike? For me, it was just a means of transportation to get from point A to point B. No magic, no euphoria, just a journey. But for him, it was so much more. When we started living together, I often heard him talk about these endless rides, how he got something like adrenaline from pedaling at a speed that scared me even when I wasn't on the bike. He always said he felt like a speed demon when he was racing along the asphalt, and this phrase invariably left me with a smile full of bewilderment. How can you be a demon on such a small bike? I see it when it's standing next to me, and it looks so small and fragile. It wasn't a sports bike like the ones professional racers use. It was the same stylish, colorful bike with small wheels that seemed just waiting to fall into the hands of some teenager. But in his eyes, it was a real warhorse. And so with each new story, I began to understand that for him, this was not just a hobby. It was a passion, a whole philosophy. He was so involved in his rides that even on ordinary walks around the city, if we accidentally got to a section with a good road, he would start racing, as if some kind of animal had awakened in him. And I still couldn't understand how one could be so carried away by this. He was a comic book hero for me when he started telling stories about his cycling adventures. And he always said with some pride how cool this speed was for him, how he could overcome any obstacles. His eyes were burning with this desire. He loved to be first, and he always was first. That's how the idea for the trip was born. He decided that we would spend 5 days cycling 30 miles every morning. My reaction was hardly enthusiastic. I wasn't ready for it, and yet I couldn't say no. He was so excited about how great it would be and how he had planned the route through the city, the forest, and the beach that I couldn't help but agree. But I was tormented by the thought, how will I endure this? After all, I'm completely untrained. I don't have the stamina, and I didn't like his enthusiasm for such grueling physical activity. When he explained the route, I imagined him racing ahead, tirelessly, like a sergeant commanding troops. And me, I already imagined my legs turning into spaghetti, my lungs burning from lack of oxygen. And he would shout at me, urging me on. Come on, don't give up, go ahead. Hurry up, loser. This was his phrase. It was on the agenda every time he started talking about cycling. I understood that for him this would not be just a vacation, but a real test for me. And at the same time, he would still enjoy the process. I decided to prepare a little, I guess, just in case. How can you prepare for something like this? When I started thinking about it, all I could think of were playful ideas about how to slow him down, like throwing rocks in his bag or making him return things I forgot. I even pouted at the idea of putting on ankle weights. Maybe they would slow him down a little. But in reality, I knew that these little psychological games wouldn't stop him. He was like a motorcycle with an engine on the start. He was tireless. His energy was boundless. With each day that the trip approached, I felt the tension growing. I couldn't tell him directly, I can't, I'm not ready. It would be like an admission of weakness, and I didn't want that. On the other hand, I couldn't hide my inner anxiety. And no matter how much I tried to cheer myself up by thinking about what would happen, I still imagined him shouting at me from afar, and me sitting there, trying to keep my balance on my bike, which seemed too heavy. When the day of departure finally came, I thought about it again and realized that I couldn't back out. I couldn't not give him a chance to demonstrate his abilities, his desire to win, and to show me that he could be the first. After all, he had organized this trip, thought up the route, packed his things. As for me, I just went. And I hoped that these 5 days would not be as painful as I imagined in my thoughts. The first morning of our trip came like a bolt from the blue. We got up early before the sun rose to make it before the hot day. The guy was on edge, full of energy and plans, already getting ready for the day. I felt the uncertainty growing inside me, the little stones of doubt turning into mountains with every step. I knew it would be hard for me, that I wouldn't be able to keep up with his pace. But I only had to look into his shining eyes, full of expectation, to suppress my thoughts and grab my bike. I can handle it, I told myself. But how could anyone prepare for such a load? He was, as we rode in my, as we drove along the forest paths, I thought about the route again. It was well thought out, and I could see how proud the guy was of having created this route. But for me, it was a real test, every minute of which was an excruciating effort. And the further we drove, the clearer one thing became. This route was for him, not for us. It was created to please him, and all I could do was simply catch up, try to keep up. But despite all my doubts, I kept going. I couldn't let myself stop. I couldn't let him think I'd given up. I fought every kilometer, every turn. My legs were already aching, but I wasn't going to give in. I couldn't let myself be weak. We reached the open beach, and here finally I felt relief. The sound of the waves, the warm air, and the calm ocean made me forget about the pain in my legs. It was a beautiful place to relax, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel happy. But I quickly realized that this was only a stopover. He was already back on his bike, ready to go again. I forced myself to follow him. It was my fight, my choice. Although I could have stopped, said that I couldn't do it anymore, I didn't, because I didn't really want to give up. And no matter how tired I was, no matter how much I wanted to just sit on the sand and forget about everything, I kept going. And every meter, every turn, every new section of the road became a small victory, although in my soul I knew that this victory would not be final. Because despite all the doubts, I knew one thing. This trip wasn't just a test for my body, it was something more. It was a test for me. Each new day brought new challenges. We moved further along the route, covering kilometers, and my thoughts did not stop fighting with reality. I felt more and more how my strength was depleted. But despite the fatigue, I could not give up on this path, on this test, even if everything inside me screamed for me to stop. No matter how much I tried to hide my tiredness, he always noticed it. He kept looking back, encouraging me, but his eyes were full of confidence, as if this was an easy walk for him. He felt alive on his bike, more than ever. But what he didn't know was that I, too, had begun to turn into something similar to a machine, with only one goal: to keep up with him. I was increasingly lost in my own thoughts, trying to find a way to cope with this situation. That day, I started making a plan in my head. There was no point in continuing as I had been doing, just huffing and puffing after him. My path would be so much easier if I used some tricks. I started thinking of various psychological strategies that might throw him off his game just a little bit. Why not play a game with him? Why not use his habit of rushing me as my trump card? We were driving along a long road through the forest, and each new section of the road seemed similar to the previous one. The wind was no longer as refreshing as in the first days, and the noise of the tires on the asphalt did not cause the same excitement as before. I had already managed to understand that he was much more prepared for this test than I was. But for me, this was more than just physical exertion. It was a test of will. I began to look for ways to slow him down, as strange as it may sound. And then I came up with an idea. If I make him forget something, I will at least gain a few minutes of rest. I needed something simple but effective. I paid attention to his bag, which was always with him. There at some point, I noticed that he had left a bottle of water, which he almost always forgot when stopping. This was a great chance for me. I decided to take advantage of this weakness. The next time we made a quick stop, I decided to play along a little. I quickly grabbed his bag, put the bottle in the corner where he would definitely not see it, and left a place for easy access. When we started riding again, he did not notice that he had forgotten his bottle. A few kilometers later, I saw him start to feel around in his bag, looking for water. He twisted it a few times and then glanced at me. I looked unfazed. I was not going to show that this was my trick. He was desperate, but it took a few minutes for him to realize that the water was behind us, and we had to go back for it. I had a hard time hiding my smile when we got back, and I could see him complaining about his forgetfulness, but I didn't say a word. I tried to keep a low profile. My plan had worked, and it lifted my spirits, but it was just the first step. He certainly wouldn't give in to one forgotten bottle. It was just the beginning. I started thinking of new ways to make him feel at least a little bit of the tiredness I felt. Over time, I realized that his strength was not just his physical fitness, but also this eternal optimism that he carried with him. He was confident that everything was under control, that nothing was impossible. I couldn't break him with force. I could only find ways to play with his confidence. Even the third day was the hardest. We were driving through the forest and even nature itself seemed to feel tired, as did I. There were no bright beaches or fresh mountain peaks here. The forest surrounded us on all sides, and only lonely paths in the heavy silence of the trees were our companions. My boyfriend was still as energetic, still confident that he kept the rhythm. I, on the other hand, felt how every movement became more and more mechanical. My legs no longer obeyed me, but I could not stop. I forced them to move, although everything inside screamed at me to give up. There was something strange about these woods. The trees stood tightly together, as if they were watching us, hiding their secrets in the shadows. I felt myself being overcome not only by physical exhaustion, but also by a strange sense of unease. It seemed these woods were more than just a place we were passing through. They were trying to tell me something. But I couldn't focus on it. I was too afraid of falling behind. The guy was already far ahead, and I realized that I couldn't move that fast on my own. No matter how hard I tried, he managed to keep up the pace, and even though I felt his laughter becoming more and more annoying, I couldn't let myself stop. I took a deep breath and bowing my head addressed myself. I won't give up, I thought. But these were no longer just words. My brain ignored all the signals from my body, which literally screamed at me that I should stop. I had no strength, but I couldn't let it know how hard it was for me. We rode along forest paths through which someone had perhaps once ridden, who also thought that it would be easy. But now these forests were becoming my test. I began planning my next steps, listening to every noise around me. Every movement on the bike was no longer just part of the process. It was becoming a struggle. How could I slow him down if I hadn't used any of my weapons yet? This time, I decided to be more careful. Looking at his backside, I noticed how he continued to move forward without looking back. At one point, I stopped, as if I had an idea for a moment. He clearly didn't notice how hard it was for me, and at that moment, I decided it was time to make moves that would definitely catch him off guard. The missing compass, that was my next move. I saw the guy using his compass all the time to check his route. He was proud of his navigation skills, but at some point I noticed that his compass looked slightly damaged. Maybe it was an accident, maybe not, but I decided to play a little on his trust in this instrument. While we were riding, I crept up to his bag and, thinking over every move, carefully pulled out the compass, hiding it under my backpack. Then I rode a little further, pretending that nothing had happened. When the guy turned around and noticed that the compass was gone, I already pretended that I didn't understand what was happening. His gaze was full of concern, but I already knew that he would start searching for the compass in a panic. We both knew that if we didn't follow the route strictly according to it, our path through the forest could turn into a mad wandering. I kept myself in check, but my mind was spinning with thoughts about how this somehow balanced my powers, at least for a moment. He came back and spent a few minutes trying to find the compass, but I could see that he clearly couldn't understand what had happened. I played my part confidently and didn't let on that I was the real culprit. After a few minutes, he gave in and said that we needed to move on. I knew that his confidence would be restored as always, and that would give him the strength to continue. We set off again, but now I felt the tension between us ease a little. He began to urge me on, but now with a wary look, a little less confident. I knew he needed a moment's distraction to process what had happened. I hadn't won yet, but a small victory in the psychological warfare brought me relief. The forest was getting darker. We all kept moving at the same pace, despite the slight loss of time. But in this forest, among the trees, I felt my fatigue starting to accumulate in my head. But I also felt that maybe I was starting to learn to be more cunning in this game. The fifth day of the trip came as a long-awaited end to a long journey. But as with the other days, I already knew that I could not relax. Fatigue made itself known at every step. My legs, like heavy weights, felt almost like iron, and it seemed that each cycle of the pedals was more and more difficult. With each new kilometer, I felt how my body resisted it. But the worst thing was not how my muscles ached, but how I lost control of my breathing. He was still full of enthusiasm, and his laughter, which I had once accepted as part of the adventure, now became something irritating. He didn't know that for me, every breath was a struggle. Even the air that should have brought relief felt heavy and not as fresh as before. I tried to breathe deeply, but I couldn't find the right rhythm. It was as if my lungs couldn't get enough oxygen, and every breath felt like a fight for survival. I knew I had to slow him down somehow, but not physically this time. I had to make him feel the same tiredness I was. We were driving through rough terrain, and ahead of us, there was a wide hill that looked like the last obstacle before our final leg, our destination. For him, it was just another part of the route, but for me, it was hell. My body, all its systems, seemed to be in a state of complete collapse. I knew that a few more hours on these roads could be a real test for me. And then, on the hill, I suddenly realized that I had to use what I had, my breath. It was weird, but I realized that if I pretended to have trouble breathing, maybe it would make him slow down and at least give me a chance to catch my breath. When he looked back again, I pretended that my breathing had broken. I slowed down and began to gasp for air. It wasn't entirely true, but I hoped he wouldn't notice that I was being deliberately dramatic. He stopped again, looked at me, and I felt his face tighten a little. "Are you okay?" His words were full of concern. He stopped his bike and walked over to me. I felt uncertainty creep into his eyes, as if he suddenly realized that he might not have noticed how I had been struggling all this time. "Yeah, it's just a little hard to breathe. It's something, you know?" I tried to sound calm, but everything inside was burning. If I could really be that open, I would tell him how hard it was for me, how I was literally holding myself back from falling. He was there, trying to comfort me, but I knew it was really just for his own comfort. He couldn't understand that my fatigue was much deeper. It wasn't just a physical struggle, it was a psychological battle with myself. But I couldn't show him how hard it was. I couldn't let him see me breaking down inside. "Maybe we should take a break for a while." His offer was sincere, and there was something scary about it. I knew he was suggesting it out of concern, but to me it felt like a defeat. "No, it's okay. We can't stop. We're almost there." I couldn't let myself show for even a moment that I couldn't continue. This was more important than the entire trip. I couldn't be weak, even if my body was already screaming otherwise. He looked at me carefully, but there was still that confidence in his eyes, as if he thought everything would be fine, that I was just overtired. But even if he couldn't understand it, I knew it was my game. I was forcing myself to play this role of someone who couldn't afford to stop, who couldn't afford to be weak. After a few minutes of rest, I got back on the bike and we continued on. My legs were starting to ache again, and my breathing was still holding in. But I knew that if I showed him how tired I really was, everything we had built would come crashing down. I couldn't let him see that he was winning this battle. But even as I tried to hide it, I felt the tension growing inside me. I was playing my part, but I was starting to get tired of these games. As time went on, I realized that this ordeal was becoming more and more difficult, not just for my body, but for my psyche as well. This was no longer a fun adventure. This was survival, and I was no longer sure how long I could hold out. On the sixth day of our journey, we approached the beach, and its stark beauty felt both a relief and another challenge. The waves that had momentarily seemed soothing now brought me no joy. I was tired, my muscles ached, and every pedal I turned felt like a struggle. My lungs, despite my best efforts, could not take in enough air. I felt each breath becoming more difficult, and my ears were increasingly filled with the noise of my own breathing. He was ahead, as energetic as ever. I saw him glance back for a moment, his eyes full of enthusiasm, yet somehow slightly wary. I could have been grateful to him for this day, for the whole trip, for organizing such a wonderful itinerary, but instead I felt my patience wearing thin. We reached the beach, and as expected, his face lit up with joy. I watched him take off his helmet, glancing at the horizon where the sky met the water. It felt like a victory moment, but I felt more and more like we were on different sides of the barricade. He was happy, he wanted to enjoy this moment, but I couldn't enjoy anything anymore. My fatigue turned to bitterness. I didn't even want to figure out what exactly was causing this pain. All I felt was the desire for this trip to end. We found a spot on the sand, and he, always full of energy, immediately began to set up his things, preparing for the next stage, rest. And I sat, watching him, trying to hide how much I didn't want to do anything. I wished I could be like him, with the same enthusiasm. But something about this journey exhausted me. I couldn't figure out what exactly. The kilometers themselves, his relentless energy, or something more? At some point, I realized that I was tired not only physically, but also emotionally. He turned to me with some strange ease and began to put things away. His smile was genuine, and he seemed completely pleased with himself. I continued to sit on the sand, trying not to show how hard it was for me. He didn't know that I was almost at the edge. I would have said that I was simply tired from this trip, but something kept me from admitting this weakness. I couldn't admit that I had invested so much in this process, and now all I felt was exhaustion and disappointment. I looked at him and felt my anger, mixed with fatigue, begin to rise. Why did I plan so much? Why did I set this marathon if I was going to feel weak and exhausted the whole time? He was happy, and I felt like an unnecessary part of this journey, a part that couldn't keep up with his energy. But even in those moments when I was close to running away and ending it all, I couldn't. I couldn't leave him alone. I couldn't admit that maybe I just wasn't ready to be a part of his world. But I stayed anyway, because it felt like this was the last chance for the two of us, at least for that moment on that beach. He continued to scan the landscape, and I could see his gaze was absorbed by the horizons. He didn't notice how I was slowing down and losing strength, and maybe that was for the best. I couldn't explain my fatigue to him anyway. Even if he had, I wasn't sure he would have taken it seriously. He was still young and full of energy. I was losing more and more confidence in myself. The realization that his energy was something he valued, and my fatigue was just an unimportant detail, filled me with irritation. But at that moment, I decided that I would not hide it any longer. If I continued to walk, I would only hurt myself. I noticed how he was retreating further and further into his own world, and I felt an increasing emptiness around me. Maybe I was not determined enough, not strong enough to fight for my feelings. But deep down, I knew that I needed something more than just the end of this journey. I had to understand what I was really looking for on this path. We stayed on the beach for a while, but my thoughts were haunting me. This day had been full of contradictions. He was so far away from me in his world, and I felt the distance growing. This was no longer a game or an adventure. I wanted to find myself on this journey, but maybe I had already lost myself. The last day of the trip arrived so quickly that I didn't even have time to realize that we were almost at the end. Everything seemed blurry. Our goal was ahead of us. And although we were moving along familiar paths, I felt like I still didn't understand why all this was necessary. Everything seemed just as difficult, but at the same time empty, as if we were just going in circles. I couldn't think of slowing him down or making him experience even a small part of my fatigue. My body had reached a state of extreme exhaustion, and my thoughts were clouded not only by physical fatigue, but also by an internal struggle that was not only with the kilometers that were left behind, but also with myself. I couldn't understand why I continued to be with him, continued to go on his terms, even though inside me there was a growing feeling that I was losing myself. We walked, and I felt his energy, his bright gaze, his lack of doubt absorbing me. He was happy, and I understood that it was important for him to go through this journey, to complete it. I tried to focus on what he expected from both of us, on what was supposed to be the culmination. But with each step, I felt my strength fading more and more. The inner tension grew, and the closer we got to the finish line, the more I wanted to just stop, not move, forget about everything, about the fact that this was not just a path on a bike, but also a path that I did not know how to take. His eyes were full of delight again as he looked at me, expecting me to share his feelings. But I couldn't. I couldn't be happy. I couldn't smile. I couldn't pretend that everything was normal. All I felt was devastation. He couldn't understand that, of course. He was happy, and that was all that mattered to him. But for me, the day had just been a long, exhausting walk from one point to another. In the last kilometers, I slowed down, despite his attempts to encourage me and continue. I knew that this was not something he could handle. It was not just tiredness. This was the moment when I was confronted with myself, with the fact that I could not go on any longer and could no longer be part of his world. I did not know what to do, did not know how to express what was tormenting me. I tried to smile, but it was not a sincere smile. It was just a cover, a mask that did not hide anything. He didn't say anything when I slowed down for the last time. He just kept going, knowing I wouldn't fall behind, even though he no longer understood that with every step I was losing my strength. I watched his back, which was getting further and further away from me, and I think that was when I realized that maybe I couldn't be who he wanted me to be anymore. Couldn't be the one who tried to keep up with him over and over again, unable to catch up, unable to be his equal. When we finally reached the finish line, I felt that all this was not what I expected. It was not a victory, not a completion that brings satisfaction. It was just a point we had come to, but it could not replace what I really needed. He was happy, smiling, feeling that we had completed this journey, and I stood next to him, feeling only confusion and slight dissatisfaction with myself. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. Maybe it was our different paces, our different energies. Maybe it was my fear that I was never able to be a part of his world, a part of what he was creating. He might be happy, but I increasingly felt like I was missing something important. Maybe there was no need to look for a reason why this trip didn't bring me what I expected. Maybe it was all just a mistake that I couldn't share his joy, couldn't walk this path with him the way he wanted. But now at the finish line, I couldn't change anything. I was left only with myself, with those thoughts that couldn't find an answer. I looked at his face, still shining, still full of satisfaction, and I knew I couldn't take myself back to that moment. I couldn't go back to the ease with which I had come to this path. This path had become more than just a journey. It was a moment of realization that I couldn't be who he wanted me to be, and I might not have known how to continue, but I already knew that this was the end of one path and the beginning of a new one. Story 2, Imakikinandar Sirenirnim. When I met her, everything seemed simple. I was sure that a long-distance relationship was something temporary, something that could be overcome. We talked at night, exchanged messages, waited for a meeting. She was sincere, open, and just as I imagined her. I got used to the idea that everything would be fine with us, even if we were far from each other. The first months were truly exciting. I waited for her every text, for her to come home and for us to be together again, even if it was just a phone call. Every morning started with the thought of her, and the evening ended with long conversations where we opened up to each other. I was proud that I could support her, listen to her worries, and be there for her, even if not in a physical sense. But then she moved. I always thought she had a strong determination, and like many, I was sure she could handle any situation. She was ambitious, smart, and worked hard to find her place in a new city. I supported all of this, but it was getting harder every day. It was hard at first, but I didn't complain. She couldn't get used to the new place right away. She couldn't find a job, and of course it was hard. I understood that she was worried that her life had changed, and it was hard for me not to be there to support her in those moments. It wasn't that I didn't worry about her. On the contrary, I was constantly thinking about how she was coping, worried about her future, about her new life. But I had my own difficulties. My work had also gone wrong, and I found myself in a situation where I didn't know how to move forward. It felt like everything was falling apart, but at the same time, I tried to be supportive to her. I often told her how hard it was for me, but I still tried not to mention how hopeless my problems seemed to me. Somehow it turned out that she was focused on herself, on her problems, and I just endured. It became harder and harder to support her with each passing month. I began to notice her becoming more and more distant. At first it was minor, fewer messages, fewer calls. I told myself it was normal, she needed time to adjust. But with each passing day, I felt her drifting further and further away. I didn't know how to support her when I felt less and less of her support. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I knew she was going through a difficult time, and I thought her behavior was just a consequence of these difficulties. But when at some point it became obvious to me that her attention was more occupied with her friends than with me, I began to feel unnecessary. More and more, it seemed to me that her interest in my problems was gradually fading. I tried to justify her behavior. She needed time. She needed space. All this was new to her. I kept telling myself that this was just a temporary phase and that she would soon come back to me. But with each passing month, my confidence began to waver. She spent more and more time with her friends, and I felt more and more that the gap between us was growing. I didn't know what to do. I started to worry that she no longer considered me an important person in her life. There were new people, new places in her life, and I was just one of those who remained in her past. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. I continued to remain silent because I didn't want to pressure her. I understood that she was worried, but I was also at my limit. I needed her support. It was hard for me, and she seemed not to notice that something was wrong. Every day I started to feel more and more like I wasn't her priority. I started to wonder if I should leave so I wouldn't be a burden, if I should end it so I wouldn't suffer even more. But I knew that all this time I was there for her. I was always there, even if I wasn't physically there. I wanted her to know that her happiness was important to me, even if it wasn't easy for me at the time. One day I noticed that she stopped texting me, that her calls became less frequent and her messages shorter. This feeling depressed me, but I again told myself that she was worried, that she was just busy. But when her friends began to occupy all her thoughts and I did not get even a minute of attention, I did not know what to do. She was my girlfriend, but it seemed that for her I was just a part of the past. When I told her that she was spending more time with her friends and less time with me, she said that she was having a hard time and that her friends were helping her through it. She didn't say that she was hurting. She didn't say that she was worried. She just said that her friends were all she had. I felt helpless. It was like a blow to the head because I thought that I meant more to her than just another person in her life. All I heard in response was her gratitude for me being there, but nothing more. I was hurting. I was trying to cope with it, trying to understand what was happening, but nothing was changing. I didn't know how to move forward. I kept silent, hoping that she would change, but inside the feeling that I was superfluous grew deeper and deeper. My own experiences became a heavy burden that I didn't know how to handle. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I wasn't good enough for her, that I didn't mean as much to her life as I wanted. It wasn't just her that was starting to fall apart. It was all happening at once, as if everything I'd ever known had suddenly shifted and swirled into one big fuzzy cloud. My work had become unbearable. I'd lost several important clients, and the people I'd counted on were starting to act like strangers. My world was falling apart, and I didn't know how to put it back together. But I tried to hang on and not complain, even as everything inside me was falling apart. I thought it would pass. The thought that I wasn't alone was a comfort to me. But with each passing day, it became more and more obvious that she was moving away. I knew that she needed time, that she was worried, but something inside me began to squeeze my heart. Her coldness oppressed me. I tried to be patient, but it became increasingly difficult. She no longer called me for no reason, did not write to me with joy as before. Everything she said was about her friends, about her new life, about her problems. And I was left with only echoes of her phrases that no longer concerned me. I began to doubt myself. If I were in her shoes, maybe I wouldn't have left my partner in that position. Maybe I wasn't what she wanted, maybe I couldn't give her what she wanted, or maybe I was so consumed with my own anxiety that I couldn't see what she really needed. But then at some point, when I was sitting in the kitchen and looking at my phone, I suddenly realized that it was too important to me. More important than ever, I needed her support. And this realization hit me like a bolt from the blue. I always believed that I could cope with any difficulties alone, that I could be strong and independent. But she was my anchor. She was the one who could bring me back to reality, the one who could help me believe in myself, even if the whole world was falling on my shoulders. But now she was not there. And then I was overcome by a strange feeling that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the pain of loneliness. It was the realization that I wasn't ready for what was going to happen between us. I didn't know what to do with this feeling. I thought I could endure it, that I could somehow cope with her inattention. But when I began to realize that all this distance wasn't just an accident, but part of her choice, I couldn't breathe. I remember sitting in my apartment, clutching my phone, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. I had once been her priority. We talked for hours, planning the future, discussing little things that didn't matter to others but were important to us. We laughed, worried, supported each other. I thought it would last, that we would endure all the difficulties, but now here I was, alone, in my own thoughts, and her silence sounded like an accusation to me. I began to wonder how I had gotten myself into this situation in the first place. Where was the moment when we began to lose touch? Had it happened gradually, and I had simply not noticed her attention, becoming distracted? Or had I failed to heed the signs that she had begun to seek solace elsewhere? I didn't know. Everything seemed blurry, unclear. Something in our communication had changed, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to shift the blame onto her. I told myself that she should have realized that I needed her support, but at the same time, I understood that she was going through as much as I was. She was going through the loss of her job, a new life, problems with adaptation. She was alone in a strange city, and I knew all of this. And although I felt that my own difficulties were no less important, I could not deny that she was still the first person with whom I would want to share this. Here, in the chaos of my thoughts, I suddenly realized that I myself might have missed something. Maybe I was too wrapped up in my own problems and didn't notice how she was losing herself in this new world. Maybe I wasn't the support person who could help her. Instead of being with her, I was essentially lost in my own experiences, and it was haunting me. It was at that moment when I was trying to sort out my feelings that I realized that maybe it wasn't just her fault that things had turned out this way. We were both lost, and even though I had always thought I would fight until the end, now I wasn't sure if it was worth fighting at all. Did I really want this relationship if it had become so empty and painful? Was it my fault for letting distance drive us apart? I decided I needed to talk to her. But what could I say? Should I tell her I felt abandoned? Should I tell her that my own experiences were unimportant to her? Or should I just sit in silence asking for nothing in return? It was all excruciating. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in this dead end. I had to decide what to do with myself and our relationship. After I realized how much was going on inside me, I felt the gap between us widening. I sat in my apartment, restlessly moving my gaze along the walls, trying to find something that could distract me from the thoughts that wouldn't leave my head. Time passed, but the feeling that I was losing her didn't go away. At some point, I decided that I couldn't stay in this silence any longer. I knew that if I didn't say anything, if I didn't express what was bothering me, then we would move in the same direction, further apart. My silence was becoming like a brick that I was building between us. But what to say? How to tell her that I felt unwanted and abandoned? How to express my pain without blaming her, without adding to her already difficult experiences? I picked up my phone, opened and closed the chat with her several times, not knowing what to write. Every time I started to type, the words lost their meaning and I deleted them. I didn't want it to sound like a complaint or an accusation. I just wanted her to understand how hard it was for me. And yet, despite all my determination, I couldn't find the right words. The next day, when I again forced myself to pick up the phone and text her, my fingers began to form a sentence that seemed both simple and painful. I feel like I don't matter to you anymore. I quickly deleted the message. I didn't want her to think I was pressuring her. I didn't want her to feel burdened again. I realized that I didn't want her to feel like I didn't understand her struggles. I missed her attention, her concern. I just wanted her to notice that I was going through this too. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that saying those words would only make things worse. She was at rock bottom, and I might be the one pushing her even deeper into that hole. I didn't want to be the one to disappoint her even more, even if my own pain was sharper than ever. As time went on, I continued to feel this sense of loneliness in the relationship. We communicated, but not in the same way as before. Sometimes I would call her, and it felt like an obligation rather than a genuine desire to talk. I began to notice that she was becoming more comfortable keeping me at a distance. She wasn't as interested as she used to be, and I, in turn, continued to look for ways to hide my pain so as not to add unnecessary weight to her. One evening, as I sat in my chair, thinking about what I could do to change the situation, I realized I can't make her be someone she doesn't want to be. I can't make her pay attention to me if she doesn't want to. I finally realized that my words weren't the answer. I could talk it out, I could express my feelings, but I knew that it wouldn't change anything. The problem was deeper than just distance. It was something bigger. I tried calling her again. We talked, but it was superficial, as if we were both trying to stick to the usual phrases so as not to touch on real feelings. I told her that I missed her, that I wanted us to talk more often. She, in turn, said that she was having a hard time and that her friends were the only thing that helped her not to give up. Those words cut me to the core. She talked about her friends as if they were her salvation, and I felt useless. I didn't expect her to put them above me, but it hurt. I tried to understand her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had become invisible in the midst of her problems. All I wanted was to feel that she still valued me, that I still mattered to her. But maybe I was being too selfish? Maybe I expected too much from her at such a difficult time for her? I didn't know. I wanted to believe that she still needed me, that she still saw me as a part of her life. But her words said otherwise. It was painful, but I realized that maybe we both needed time. We were both going through our own struggles, and at some point I realized that if I kept asking her for things she couldn't give me, it would only make things worse. And then, after yet another conversation, I felt fatigue taking over me. I didn't know how to live with this feeling any longer. I continued to love her, but what was I supposed to do with this love if she couldn't reciprocate my feelings at the moment when I needed it most? At that moment, I knew I needed to take a break, at least for a while. Maybe I should have given her space to sort out her feelings and issues. But was that the right decision? Could it lead to us being close again? Or would it mean the end for us? I didn't know. But one thing was clear. I couldn't continue to fight this situation unless I was prepared to face the reality that something was broken between us. Time felt strange, as if it were stretching and compressing depending on how I thought about her. It wasn't just a feeling of uncertainty, but something more. Something that was trying to make me anxious. But I was ignoring it, hoping it would resolve itself. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I couldn't continue like this. My silence became more and more oppressive, and I began to realize that I needed to be an active participant in this situation, not a passive observer. We continued to communicate, but it wasn't the same communication as before. Every message, every call became not just a meeting, but a test. I tried to be patient, pretending that everything was normal, but deep down I began to doubt more and more that everything we had been through before made sense. I wondered, what can I do? How can I help her when I'm in the same hole? I didn't want to be the person who only complained. I wanted to be supportive, but when every conversation became a test of patience, support began to seem impossible. She kept turning to her friends, and it was driving deeper and deeper into my soul, like a nail into wood. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just one of many for her, and that she didn't see me as a partner with whom she could cope with difficulties. This tormented me because I had long been accustomed to the fact that there was a special connection between us that no one could replace. But now I felt that this connection was crumbling, and I could do nothing to preserve it. I felt like I was trying so hard to read her mind, trying to figure out what she needed, what was important to her, but I kept getting lost. I didn't know what to expect from her. She kept saying that her friends were all that kept her going. At some point, I realized that maybe I was becoming part of her problem because I couldn't offer her what she expected from me. Maybe I was too focused on my own experiences to really understand what was going on with her. It wasn't just her struggle. I was part of that struggle too. But at some point, it became difficult for me to understand how I could be helpful when her eyes were elsewhere. We no longer discussed our dreams or plans. We didn't talk about the future. All that was left were conversations about the present moment, and they became increasingly superficial. I couldn't believe that this was happening to us. When night fell, I often woke up and thought about how we could make things right. On the one hand, I knew that you can't force someone to feel something they don't feel. I knew that I couldn't force her to be with me if she wasn't ready for it. But on the other hand, I was scared that maybe I had missed something. Maybe I hadn't been paying enough attention to her. Maybe my own problems had consumed me so much that I wasn't the person she could find comfort in. We continued to talk, but the conversations became more and more mechanical. I didn't know what to do with these conversations because every word seemed to lose its meaning. I tried to talk to her, to ask how she was feeling, but her answers didn't have the warmth I was so desperately looking for. There was more alienation in the answers than understanding. And then I started to wonder, maybe I should have given her more space. Maybe her need for friends was her way of coping with what she was going through. But if that was the case, what should I do? Not be there for her? Watch her drift further and further away? Or keep fighting for what was left, even if it was getting harder and harder? It was hard for me to accept. But I realized that I needed to start looking at the situation through more than just my own experiences. She was going through something of her own. I knew that. I began to realize that maybe I should have been more patient. I should have been more supportive rather than demanding. I couldn't continue to act as if the world revolved around my problems. And maybe that was the moment I realized that my struggle shouldn't be with her, but with myself. I had to learn to let her go when she needed it. But it was hard to let go when you don't know if the person will come back, when you don't know if they will be there. And yet I knew that I had to find a way to be there without asking for anything in return. Because maybe that was the only way I could help her at the moment when she needed support, and not another source of pressure. Still, the question remained, how long could I hold on to this state of limbo? When would it become too painful for me? And most importantly, when could we get back to where we were before? With each passing day without normal conversations with her, I felt this invisible barrier between us growing stronger. I was used to living with the idea that relationships are not only joys, but also difficulties that need to be overcome together. However, now it was difficult to understand what I should be fighting. We did not talk about our feelings, did not discuss what was troubling us. All that was left were empty conversations about how the day went, which did not touch on the essence of our experiences. It exhausted me, and I increasingly wondered what I was doing wrong. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that I was no longer the same person I used to be. I became irritable, closed, typing irritably messages that I ended up simply deleting. I tried to be patient, not to impose myself on her, not to demand more attention, but the feeling of resentment grew more and more inside me. I couldn't understand why she couldn't understand how hard it was for me. I couldn't understand why she didn't pay me the attention that I thought I deserved. More and more, I was tormented by the feeling that I had become invisible to her, that I was no longer someone with whom she could share her experiences, her thoughts. My heart sank when I thought that perhaps she no longer needed me as much as she used to. But I remained silent. Silent because I didn't know what to say. Silent because I was afraid that my words would push her away even more. And at the same time, silent because I couldn't trust these empty conversations that we had every day. Inside me, there was a feeling that our relationship was like fragile glass that was about to crack. I was ready for it, but I didn't know if I could survive the consequences if it happened. There were times when I tried to do things to forget. I went out with friends, went shopping, tried to find comfort in simple things, but all of these were like lifelines that could not keep me afloat. My thoughts kept returning to her. I thought about what she was going through, but more and more often these thoughts turned into memories of how things used to be. When we laughed, when it was just nice to be together, when we could talk about anything and feel like everything was going to be okay. And then, on one of those days when I was going through all this alone again, she wrote to me. It was a short message saying that she needed time. She didn't say that she didn't want to talk to me anymore, but there was something in her words that made me feel like she was pulling away even further. The message was like a cold wind that ripped all my hopes out of my hands. There were no promises, no certainties. It was simple, and at the same time, its brevity spoke to me more than words could. I felt the ground shift beneath me. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to do with this information. I wasn't sure what her request for time meant. It could have just been her way of taking a breather. But maybe it was also a signal that she needed space to sort out her feelings. Maybe she was going through so much that she couldn't think about us. And maybe I was too focused on my loneliness to realize how difficult it was for her. I could have texted her, asked her to explain what she meant, but instead I decided to wait. I had to give her this time. But with that waiting came a growing sense of uncertainty in my chest. I didn't know how long I could hold on. I didn't know if I could stay strong if she kept pulling away. A week passed, and during this time I tried to focus on myself. I continued to work, to see friends, but my thoughts kept returning to her. It was excruciating. Sometimes when I was almost able to let go of the situation, I would feel that sharp prick in my heart again, as if I had missed something, as if I could do something to get back what we had lost. And so, a week later, she wrote to me again. This time her message was different. She began by apologizing for her distance, saying that she had a hard time dealing with herself and her thoughts. She admitted that she often felt lost and couldn't find the right words to explain what was happening to her. She didn't apologize for leaving me alone, but I sensed genuine regret in her words. She said she needed time to sort out her feelings and figure out what she really wanted from a relationship. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know what to say to make her feel supported. I wanted to be there for her, but I knew she might need time to find her answers. But it was hard for me to stay in that state where I still didn't have a clear understanding. I answered her, but the words seemed empty to me. I wanted to support her, but I didn't know how. And most importantly, I didn't know if I could continue to support her if this distance between us only increased. The process of waiting was unbearable. We became like two people standing on opposite banks of a river, and although the river was not wide, its currents were still too strong to cross. More and more often, I found myself thinking that this emptiness between us was too deep to be filled by desire alone. We exchanged messages, but none of them could restore what was lost. Each word seemed half distorted to me, not insincere, but detached, almost as if we were both speaking different languages. I tried to understand her words, but instead I was faced with my own doubts and worries that perhaps we were not destined to find this common language. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain this delicate balance. I was willing to support her, if only I knew how. But every time she opened up to me about her feelings, I felt like I didn't know what I was feeling. I kept trying to be the person who comforted her, but was I able to figure it out on my own? I couldn't talk about how hard it was for me. I couldn't express how torn I was apart by everything that was happening. She continued to struggle with her inner demons, and it was hard for me to understand how I could help when I was falling prey to those same doubts. I tried to find solace in other things. I worked, I made time for hobbies, I saw friends, but it was always the same. I felt like I was on the edge. I wanted to find a way to feel normal, even for a moment. Sometimes I would ask friends to hang out with me, but even in their company, I couldn't escape the feeling of loneliness that was taking over me. I was around people, but I still felt empty, like I was cut off from everything that had once mattered. And then one of those evenings when I was trying to take my mind off her, she texted me again. It was a short message, but it hit me harder than I expected. There were no words about how she was feeling or what she was going through. There were no apologies, but there was one simple sentence. Maybe we should meet up. It was a ray of light in the fog, but it was also another step into the unknown. We didn't discuss what was coming. We didn't talk about what would happen next. All I could feel was her desire to be there, even if it didn't mean returning to the old reality. I didn't know how to react to this. I thought I had to be careful, that I couldn't just jump into this meeting without knowing where it would lead. But on the other hand, I felt like this could be the last chance, a chance to talk, to be there, to understand how we both really felt. I was ready to meet, even though doubts were raging inside me. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what to do with this message. But I knew for sure that I couldn't continue living in this emptiness any longer. We agreed to meet in a few days. That day I felt strange. I didn't know what to expect. We hadn't spoken for so long that each meeting seemed so long awaited, but at the same time terrifying. I knew that in reality I would have to be prepared for the fact that everything could change, that this might not be the moment I was waiting for. On the day of our meeting, I tried to calm myself down, but it was difficult. I thought about how hard it was for her and how I probably needed to be more patient, or maybe on the contrary, give her more space. But most of all, I thought about the fact that she had written to me after all, that she had suggested meeting. I didn't know what that meant, but it meant something important. When I saw her, I immediately felt that there was still this wall between us, but it was not as high. We started talking, and the conversation seemed easy, although I knew that there was a huge weight hidden in our words. We talked about everything that had happened to us during the time of silence, about how each of us felt in this tyranny of distance. And although the words were simple, I felt that this was the beginning of something new. We did not solve all the problems in one evening, but it was a step forward. We could not go back to the past, but we could try to understand each other in a new way. I realized that maybe I needed to stop trying to control, to stop expecting things to be the way I wanted them to be. I needed to just be there, to be willing to listen, to be open to change. And I hoped that this meeting was the moment that could bring back the closeness we had lost. As time went on and things changed, I began to realize that maybe that's where the power lies. Being open to change, not dwelling on what was, and allowing the relationship to evolve in the direction it needs to take. Our meetings became more and more frequent. After we finally talked openly and honestly, much of what was hanging between us became a little clearer. However, I felt like we were still on the verge of something important, but we couldn't take the step in the direction we both wanted. It was like a gap between the desire to be close and the fear that our expectations might not match reality. There were doubts inside me, questions I couldn't ask, and answers I wasn't ready to hear yet. Every morning when I woke up, I felt like our connection, though restored, was different. Not worse, just different. And maybe that was the hardest part. We couldn't go back to the way we were, and I didn't know if I could accept that things would never be the same again. I kept trying to support her, to help her cope with her problems, and at some point I realized that I myself did not know how to cope with the feelings that were difficult for me to hide. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine, that I did not feel lost and insecure. It was so deep that I could not even explain exactly what was bothering me. We started talking about the future more and more. It was something that always made me nervous. We started discussing how we would arrange our lives if everything worked out. But the more we talked, the more I felt like I wasn't quite ready to have these conversations. She was ready, she wanted it, she was sure of her feelings, but I wasn't so sure. I couldn't understand why it was so hard for me to believe that we could move forward without these many doubts. I needed time to figure out what I really needed and expected from this relationship. I felt a little lost, like I was trying to pick up pieces of myself that were scattered and I didn't know how to put them all together. I couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty, but at the same time I knew that my feelings weren't going to go away just because I wanted them to go away. I was in a place where all my thoughts were mixed up, and I didn't know how to put them in their place. Sometimes I felt like I had done everything I could. I had made an effort to be there. I had opened up. I had tried to understand her. I had tried to be the one who didn't blame, but supported. But I had to admit one thing. I didn't know if I could continue in this direction if I couldn't figure out my own feelings. I decided I needed to talk to her again. This time, not about her problems or what was going on between us. I wanted to talk about myself, about how I felt in this relationship. I wanted to be honest with her because I knew that was the only way I could move forward. I didn't know what she would say. Maybe she would understand. Maybe she would say that she felt the same way I did. Or maybe she would leave and we wouldn't be able to continue being together. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but maybe it was never meant to be. I realized that it was important not only to understand that there were problems between us, but also how we resolved them. No matter what happened, I had to accept the fact that I couldn't control everything. I couldn't force her to change, just as she couldn't force me to be someone I wasn't. But I knew one thing. If we both wanted to, if we were both willing to fight, we could overcome anything. And maybe this step I was about to take would be the last one on this long and difficult road to understanding and agreement. I dialed her number and pressed the call button, feeling anxiety creeping through me. My mind was racing with thoughts of what I wanted to say, but I knew I couldn't prepare the words in advance. I had to be real. I had to be honest. And I hoped she'd be willing to listen and understand, because I was willing to understand her. When I heard her voice on the other end of the line, I felt everything in the world go quiet for a moment. I knew I would listen. I knew she would listen. And that was the first step to making everything that seemed lost whole again. Story 3. I never thought I'd find myself here in this moment, with this terrible knowledge stabbing me in the chest like a knife. The night was quiet, too quiet to be honest. 3:30 a.m. The lamp's shadows twisted across the table, across the old, battered phone I held in my hands. I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what to do. But now that I'd started looking, it was too late. It wasn't anything big, nothing obvious. It wasn't a big deal. No flashy texts or harsh comments. It all started with a small, invisible thread that I accidentally touched, and it unraveled a whole bunch of lies that I didn't even know I was holding in my hands. I simply looked at her phone, not because I wasn't trusted, but because I felt something was wrong. There was a shadow that I couldn't ignore. I wasn't usually the one checking up. I was sure that I trusted her, that our bond was strong, that we didn't need to watch each other. But here I just couldn't find peace. We had problems, I knew that. Life hadn't been easy the last couple of years. Her mother had died and she was dealing with it in her own way. We were both dealing with this crisis as best we could. I was always there for her, even when I couldn't find the strength for myself. But something in her demeanor had changed. Something had begun to creep beneath the surface. I couldn't figure out what it was. I felt a wall growing between us, like we were both on different sides and couldn't get past this barrier. I didn't know if it was stress or loss or just that we were both tired, but I felt something happening nonetheless. She promised me that nothing would happen. We talked about it. She assured me that all these conversations with him, with this guy, were just friendly, that he was her friend, that there was nothing more. And I believed her. I decided to trust her because it was easier. I didn't want to question everything I believed in because it seemed safer to me. But that night, something snapped. Maybe it was just curiosity. Maybe it was an instinct that wouldn't let me rest. But I decided to look. On her phone screen was everything I didn't need to know. Messages I shouldn't have read. Phrases I shouldn't have seen. Those words tore at my heart like knives. I cringed in pain, in shock. It was like a punch in the stomach when you don't even understand what happened, and suddenly you realize that you are dying from it. It was like death, but the kind that doesn't come instantly, but smoothly, unbearably slowly, when you understand that with every breath you lose something important. Everything I believed in collapsed in seconds. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, staring at my phone, tears welling up in my eyes, but I couldn't let them go. I didn't know what to do. Every heartbeat felt like an echo from another world, because I wasn't in mine anymore. My world had ceased to exist, and I was standing in its ruins, not knowing how to get out. All those years we spent together, all those moments we shared, seemed like nothing more than empty memories. We spent too much time building this, creating something real, something to believe in. And now all those memories were empty. How could they be real if she was with him? It was hard to believe what I saw. Her words, her promises that I had heard so often didn't mean anything now. She had promised that she would never be with him, that it didn't matter, that they were just friends. But what I saw ruined everything. Now I knew that she had lied to me. She had lied to me, and I had been so stupid that I had believed her. I sat there in the dark, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to deal with this knowledge, with these painful, heavy, destructive thoughts swirling around in my head. All I could think about was how she could do this, how she could betray me like this. She had always been my rock. She had always supported me. But now I felt like I was standing alone in this world, and my whole world had collapsed. I sat there, not knowing how to move on, not knowing what to do with this knowledge, with this broken heart, with this everything that I was now carrying inside me. I was trapped in my own feelings, and I didn't know how to get out. The night wore on, but I still sat there, unable to make a decision. Should I go or stay? Should I forgive or not forgive? These questions seemed too big for me, and I didn't know how to answer them. I just sat there and thought about how everything had changed, how I ended up here, in this place, with this knowledge that was destroying me from the inside. There was no way out, no easy solution. I was just a man who had lost everything he loved. I didn't know how to move on, didn't know how to stop feeling this cold inside. When everything collapsed, I had nowhere to go. My head was filled with questions that I couldn't find answers to. I sat in the dark, and it seemed like the world outside the room was still spinning, but I was in another dimension, in a void where I was alone, and all my senses were frozen in stillness. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know where to start. She didn't come to me that night. No matter how long I waited, her footsteps didn't sound on the floor, the door didn't open, and I didn't hear her voice. Maybe I even expected her to come and explain, but that didn't happen. It was as if the house had become quieter than usual, and even the air was somehow viscous and heavy. Everything was in its place, but I felt as if an insurmountable abyss had appeared between us, into which it was impossible to simply jump and return. I didn't know how to approach her. I didn't know what to say, how to express what I was going through. I was angry and empty at the same time. I couldn't shake this feeling of standing still, while all my emotions were crashing down on me like a waterfall. I thought about our children, about how I should look in front of them. I thought about how I needed to do something to not lose myself, to not lose my family. But what could I do if she had already made a choice? Even if silently, even if she hadn't said anything other than what I saw in her messages? In the morning, I decided not to approach her right away. I wanted to collect my thoughts, try to figure out what I was feeling. Everything was like a fog, and every step was difficult. I made a cup of coffee, but despite the usual morning action, everything felt wrong. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to move forward. Our children woke up earlier than usual. They are always so active, always trying to bring their energy into this house, as if nothing could break them. I was distracted by their noise, by their smiles, but even they could not help me. I felt like I was in another world in which there was no time or place for joy. How do you explain to your children that their parents are going through a crisis? How do you get them to understand that in the adult world, things aren't always that simple, and that sometimes what seems unshakable can actually collapse with one wrong step? I didn't know how to tell them the truth, how to prepare them for the fact that their world could collapse, just like mine. I always thought that marriage was something strong, something that could withstand any storm. We built it together, step by step, day by day. We had our difficulties, our victories and defeats. We had been through a lot together, and I always believed that together we would overcome everything. But now that I was faced with this fact, with the fact that trust had been broken, I didn't know what to do with this knowledge. I thought I knew her, that I understood what was going on in her head, in her soul. But now that I saw these messages, these words, I was sure of nothing. I didn't know how to trust her again, how to know that she was telling the truth when she assured me that nothing had happened. How could I trust words when they were destroyed by such simple but painful actions? Memories of her words, her promises, her assurances floated through my mind. We always said that we wouldn't do anything that would destroy what we were building. She always said that it was important to be honest with each other. But then why were her words and actions now so far apart? How could I trust her again when every word now sounded like a lie, even if she didn't mean it? With every hour, with every minute, I felt how this gap between us only grew wider. I didn't know how to cross it, didn't know what I needed to say or do to somehow restore what was lost. I didn't know how to return the world we had before. I didn't know if anything could be returned at all or if everything was already destroyed forever. Every morning I would meet her gaze and she would try to act normal. But I knew there was something different in her eyes. It was something I couldn't ignore. She saw that I knew. She saw that I had changed. We both knew that something was wrong anymore, but neither of us knew how to fix it. I didn't know what to say, and she didn't know how to explain it to me. Every time I looked at her, I felt my heart break. It wasn't because I was angry. I wasn't mad at her, at least not completely. It was because I was in pain, a pain I couldn't control, a pain that wouldn't let me rest. It wasn't just the pain of her betrayal. It was the pain of not knowing how to believe again, how to trust again. I kept thinking that I could survive this, that I could somehow cope. But every day, knowing this became more and more difficult. All I wanted was to turn back time, to not see these messages, to not know the truth that destroyed my world. But now it was too late. The third day after I learned what had happened brought me neither relief nor clarity. Every moment was filled with an invisible weight that was pressing down on me. I tried to think rationally, to gather my strength to solve something, but the feeling of being broken did not go away. The pain that was pumping through my chest was so sharp that I doubted whether I would be able to return to normal life at all. When I looked at her, my eyes searched for something familiar, something old, but I couldn't find it. I saw her and her gaze, her expression, were like a mirror of what was going on in my head. I still wanted to believe that it was just a mistake, that what I saw didn't matter. But deep down I knew it was no longer just a mistake. It was something more, something that broke me. Every morning we started the day with some familiar routine, but it was as if there was an invisible barrier between us. We exchanged only the necessary words, as if we were afraid of something more. I couldn't help but think that in her eyes I saw regret, but also something more, uncertainty. She couldn't look at me the same way anymore. She couldn't give me the confidence I needed. The children, as always, remained our best allies, but they could not save us from what was happening. We continued to live in that house, but it became not a home for us, but a rented place where no one felt safe. I tried to be near them, to laugh, to play, but there were so many worries in my head that no smile could help me. I tried to find solace in being a good father, a good friend, but every step only deepened the sense of loss. The evenings were the hardest. In the evening, when the children were already asleep, when the house was filled with silence, I felt the tension growing. We sat next to each other, but every glance was filled with questions. I tried not to think about what she did to me. I tried not to think about what would have happened if I had believed her right away, when she said there was nothing between them. If I had not built in my head those scenarios that actually turned out to be true. But how can you forget that moment? How can you forget the chill that ran down your spine when I first saw those messages? They were innocent, seemingly ordinary words, but I read everything in them. I saw what I was afraid to see, and it shocked me. Not in the sense of physical betrayal. No, that was even worse. I saw that she had made a choice, that she was not the woman I thought she was. I saw how she had manipulated me, how she had tried to hide the truth. And it was scary. When I tried to talk to her, I noticed how her words became quieter, how she searched for words to justify her actions. But I couldn't believe it anymore. How can you trust a person who once destroyed your trust? I tried to understand her, tried to hear her, but all I could feel was the emptiness between us. I saw how she was holding back tears, how she was trying to say that she would fix everything, that she didn't want to lose me, but I didn't know how to believe it anymore. At some point, I just went silent. I sat in my room, trying to figure out what to do next. I had to make a decision, but it was so hard. How many times had I wondered if it would be better to stay and try to make things right, or to leave and leave her in the past? But neither thought gave me relief. I didn't know what was right. I didn't know if I could live with this pain, with this betrayal, or if I should leave and start over. We started arguing more often. Every word between us became a jab. Every excuse she made was just another attempt to cover her tracks. And even though I knew fighting wasn't the answer, I couldn't stop. I couldn't just stay silent and pretend everything was okay when I was in such a turmoil inside. Our family had always been a place of stability, a place where I felt loved and important. But now I didn't know what would happen next. This crisis was something unpredictable, something I had never experienced before. I thought our marriage was strong, but now I saw how easy it was to destroy what had been built over so many years. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her words again? I felt helpless, like I had lost control of my life, and I didn't know what would happen next. I knew there would be a difficult road ahead, but none of the decisions felt right. Could I still love her after everything that had happened? Could I survive this pain, or would it stay with me forever? And most importantly, what should I do for myself and for our family? The days went on, but they were longer than ever. I spent more and more time in the shadows thinking, finding no way out, no answer. I simply existed, like a robot, going through the motions. But with every step I took, I lost a piece of myself. I couldn't even tell anymore who I was. The guy who was once confident in himself, or the one who now worries about every word, every action, as if it could be his last. She was trying to connect. I could see her efforts, trying to get back on track, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what she was feeling. I saw her eyes full of worry, but also trying to assuage her guilt. I couldn't help but notice how her words were sometimes full of shadow, how her movements became slow and careful, how she avoided meeting my eyes. I didn't know how to get back to what had been, how to restore trust when it had already been destroyed, how to look into her eyes again and not think about what was happening at the moment when I learned the truth. I tried to be close, tried not to show how hard it was for me, but every step and every word she took caused pain in me. I felt her distance and my own, as if our souls no longer found a common language. Every night I went to bed and couldn't sleep. My thoughts were like a stuck record, repeating the same questions. Can I trust again? Can I forgive? If so, how? Sometimes I felt stuck, trapped, with no right path. Marriage isn't just a relationship, It's a union of souls, isn't it? And now that one of them had drifted away and the other was wounded, I didn't know what to do with the gap. She tried to talk, and I knew she genuinely wanted to change the situation, to come back, but I had neither the strength nor the desire to open up. I couldn't forget that trust had been broken. I couldn't shake the idea that her promises were just words that now sounded like empty phrases. And even though she asked me to trust her, I didn't know how. I didn't know if I could allow myself to be vulnerable again, like before. Sometimes when things got too complicated, I went outside. I walked around the yard, looked at the night sky, and tried to find answers in the silence. But there, in the cold air, in the darkness of the night, there were no solutions. It was like standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down. I knew there was an opportunity to take a step back, but I was afraid that if I took a step forward, everything might collapse. We all wear masks, and I was no exception. I tried to stay calm and control my emotions so that the children would not notice that something was wrong. But inside me, there was destruction. I did not know how to continue playing this role when my soul was searching for salvation. Every morning was difficult. When I woke up, I felt this vacuum. My actions were mechanical. I took care of my family, fulfilled my duties, but my heart was heavy. I knew I couldn't go on like this forever. I felt like something had to change, but everything around me seemed so unstable. My whole life was blurry, like a dream from which I couldn't wake up. I understood that if I didn't take a step, if I didn't make a decision, everything would just consume me. I didn't know what to choose, to accept what happened and try to forgive, or to leave so as not to suffer every day. I asked myself a question that now sounded like the most important one. Is it possible to love when trust is broken? It was a question I didn't know the answer to. I was looking for support, looking for someone who could help me, but deep down I understood. In this situation, no one can help me except myself. At times I tried to imagine what it would be like if we had decided to move on. I imagined how we would get through this storm together, how we could find closeness and trust again. But then I would remember her words, her look that was full of regret, and I would begin to doubt again. I didn't know how to tell her that I couldn't really be with her, that every time she came near me I felt betrayed. I didn't know how to get back what I had lost, or how to trust again. And at that moment I realized that I needed time. I needed space to figure myself out. I couldn't make a decision right now without knowing what I really wanted. And even though I was afraid that this might be the end, I knew that this was the only way to move forward. I took a step back. Several days passed. Time became something completely inert for me. Hours dragged on like endless minutes. I existed, but I did not live. My thoughts were spinning like an autumn elevator, falling from a tree, not knowing where to land. The days became similar to each other, and I could not break out of this state. Every day I woke up, did routine things, but the same question sounded in my head. What should I do next? I needed to deal with this empty feeling inside, this lump that wouldn't let go and wouldn't let me breathe. I couldn't forget what had happened. We were both broken, but in her eyes I saw the desire to rebuild. She said she wanted to keep fighting for us, but her words now seemed as empty as before. I didn't know how sincere her words were. With each passing day, I felt our bond tearing apart. I couldn't believe we were here, that we were at this point where all the promises, all the years, all the memories of happy moments had crumbled into dust. And most importantly, I didn't know how to find my way back. We had already walked this path, and now everything seemed as impenetrable as this wall that had grown between us. I tried not to show it, not to show my doubts, my inner destruction. Every time I came home, I saw her face, and she was trying to do everything to bring back at least a piece of what was. She was ready to work, to try to fix it, but I no longer knew if it was possible. Maybe I was just too tired from all this fighting. Maybe I was so stricken with pain that I couldn't allow myself to believe in recovery. It had been over a week since I had learned the truth. We had both remained in this silence. We were like two people standing on different shores. I was ready to step into the void, but I didn't know how. Everything I did was empty. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what I wanted. I wasn't ready to return to that world where everything seemed possible, and all this time, I couldn't close my eyes or get rid of the thought that she had deceived me once again. I often walked around the house, checking that everything was in place. Sometimes I stopped in front of the mirror, looked at my reflection, and tried to understand who I was now. Every morning I asked myself this question, as if I were trying to find an answer, as if all these hours of waiting, this swamp of thinking, would lead me to something meaningful. But I never found an answer. She felt that emptiness too. I saw her sometimes sitting silently next to me, but she didn't say anything. She, like me, knew that something needed to change, but she didn't know where to start. We were both so wounded that we didn't have the strength to restore what had been destroyed. She tried. I saw her efforts, but I didn't know how to believe it. I didn't know how to learn to trust the person who was once there again. Every day I asked myself, why did this happen? Why did I have to go through this? There were no answers. I knew this couldn't be the end, but I also felt like this couldn't be the beginning of something new. We were in limbo, in this moment when everything was just starting to fall apart, but it wasn't completely broken yet. Sometimes she would look at me with despair, and I couldn't believe that her gaze was actually directed at me. There was not only pain in it, but also fear. Fear that she had lost everything. Fear that I would never come back. She wanted to believe that it could still be fixed, that somehow we could be put back together, but her confidence was as shaky as my own attempts to find a way. We were both on the edge. I went outside again, trying to figure myself out. I looked at the sky, which seemed as empty as my soul. I looked for answers in the trees and the cold air, but I could not find them anywhere. I felt lost in this world. And maybe that was my true state. Lost. I was lost, and all that was left was emptiness. What now? It wasn't a question of what to do next. It was about knowing where to go when you don't know what you want anymore. When I didn't know what I wanted. All that was left was the silence, and it was getting louder and louder. And I didn't know how much of it I could take. When the new day came, I woke up, but it felt like I was not allowed to return to normal life. I kept reaching for that state when everything seemed stable, when there were no damn doubts. But reality did not let me go. I could not just wake up and forget about everything. I could not close my eyes to what had happened. This whole situation did not leave me for a second. Everything I did, everything I experienced, it continued, like an inevitable shadow of the past. The days became even more difficult. I felt them every second, as if each moment stretched into eternity. We lived under the same roof, but there was nothing in common between us. I saw her trying. I saw her doing things, reaching out to me, but it seemed to me that I could not reciprocate her feelings. Everything inside me was empty. I continued to perform daily duties as if I did not feel anything. The family was silent. We were both afraid to say anything, afraid to open this wound that had already become too deep. The children, they were the only thing that kept me above water. Every time I looked at them, I knew I couldn't just give up. I couldn't let these little souls witness everything falling apart. I couldn't let them become part of this shadow growing in our home. I kept hugging them, feeding them, caring for them, but all the time I felt like the last pieces of myself were being cut off inside me. I did it because I knew it was necessary, that they needed it, but I was like a robot fulfilling my obligations, and not a single moment was sincere. She felt it too. I saw how she avoided talking about the future, how she said we needed time, but I knew it was just empty words. We both knew that time would not bring back what was lost. Time would not bring back trust. Time would not bring back the closeness we once had. I watched her change, how her eyes lost their confidence, how her words became more and more cautious, how she seemed to be waiting for my decision. But what could I decide? I didn't know what to do with this pain that was still with me, this heaviness that was preventing me from moving forward. Every night I tried I was, when she, it was like I didn't, we were more and more, I began to wander around the house often. And in these empty rooms, some kind of lingering anxiety began to flare up. I could not sit still. I could not stand in the shadow of that foggy life that had been before. I felt as if I was attached to my pain, but I did not know how to get rid of it. I thought about the future, and it did not seem bright to me. Whatever I chose, I did not know what awaited me. Each step, each decision was something more than just an everyday action. It was a step that could change everything. She kept trying. She became more attentive, more caring. Every move she made was like an apology, like an attempt to return what was gone. And in her eyes, I saw desperation. She wanted me to believe her, to feel her love again. But how could I believe? How could I believe after everything that had happened? I couldn't find the strength to take that step back. Didn't know how to believe that everything would change. Even when she said she wanted to fix everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that it would be the same again. In those moments, I felt like my soul was tired. I was tired of the idea of choosing. I was tired of this feeling that my heart was breaking and I couldn't do anything about it. I kept thinking about what I needed, what our family needed, but my head was empty. I didn't know what would be better. I didn't know how it would all go on. I tried to imagine my life without her, but even in that picture, there was something empty. I tried to imagine my life with her, but I didn't know what would happen to my heart. There were questions everywhere and no more answers. Every day I looked at her, and she looked at me with the same hope as before, with the same look that not long ago I could have considered sincere. But now I no longer knew how to react. I was frozen, frozen in this moment, in this time, in this place. My heart could not move forward, and everything that was connected to us seemed lost in a cloud of gray memories. More and more, I felt like I needed a break. But a break from what? From her? From myself? Or from everything? I didn't know. What was the right decision? To stay and try to rebuild everything? Or to just leave? To stop this pain? To not see those uncertain eyes and feel this shame that we had lost something important? I couldn't find the answers, but I knew one thing. If I did something, I would live with this choice, and it was scary. The whole situation became like a dark path in the forest, where every step only takes you deeper into the unknown. Time passed, and I still didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to allow myself to be happy, and perhaps that was the scariest thing. Not that I didn't know how to rebuild trust, but that I didn't know how to learn to trust myself again. Sometimes I would sit in silence and feel this moment consume me. Everything I once knew now meaningless. I didn't know how to move forward, didn't know how to take that step that could change everything. But I knew I needed time. Time to figure out what to do. Time to sort myself out, to figure out what I really needed. And maybe that was the only answer I could give myself.